Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. Together we explore the underlying connections and root causes of our life together so that we might discover what is really true and, in the process, develop an antiviral, antiviral mindset in a culture of spiritual decay, moral disease, and political deception, and dare I even say demagoguery. I'm Mike.
I'm Luke.
And today we're going to discuss a few things. We're going to discuss some Trump stuff, 3 or 4 things. We have different things, a little bit of Christian nationalism kind of stuff, and how do we conduct ourselves in this world. And I think we'll touch on a couple other things. But we were starting off camera to have a conversation, and we just said, let's just save this for our intro. The question is, when you were a kid, superheroes, you did superheroes, I did superheroes. What was your default, if you'd have been able as a kid to pick one superpower to be yours, not with your assessing with your adult mind now,
right?
But what did you gravitate towards as a kid?
I wanted to fly.
You wanted to fly.
And it's not like Superman was my favorite.
Yeah,
in fact,
you said,
he kind of wasn't.
Yeah.
Superman to me always seems boring. Spider-Man was my guy, right?
Yeah.
And I used to draw Spider-Man a lot.
Okay.
But I wanted to fly. I remember as a kid having dreams about flying.
Well,
they were the best dreams.
Yeah, I had flying dreams. Mine were mixed. They were good flying dreams, but I had bad ones with being attacked in our house growing up. We had 5 acres, and we were being attacked by Indians from the back things, and I would fly away, but I couldn't get more than 8 feet off the ground or 6 feet. I was just within reach of being grabbed, right?
Yeah.
So half my flying dreams were not fun.
You know what I learned as an adult, having gotten a motorcycle, is that flying is really impractical for the sheer cold. If you're flying up through clouds in Oregon, most of the time flying would be a terrible power.
Yeah. Well, mine was, if I view it that way, not with an adult mind, but what was I intrigued by is the Flash. Speed. I have no idea really why, but somehow that just felt like if I was as fast as a Flash, Superman can't catch the Flash.
So they say, yeah.
So they say, yes, but I don't even know why that. Well, hey, we're
the Flash running fast. That's true. And Superman started this way. He couldn't fly. He could just jump right over buildings in a single bound. It was human, but more.
Yeah.
And then it became, he can lift planets or whatever. That was later.
Yeah.
So the Flash is sort of that natural, I want to run and even faster, which every kid wants, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now, I thought if a podcast is recorded in the forest, but no machinery is turned on, is it even heard?
That's deep.
All right. That's only because if you're listening to this, you don't know that we did it last night and messed up our recording. So we're taking our topics and we're going to run through them because we had a good time. It was a good conversation.
Yeah.
So let's start out with you just had an observation. We're going to try to tick off some of the boxes we had yesterday, but we'll let today's conversation be today's. Zelensky, you had an observation and...
Well, so the Ukraine it always feels like it's ramping up. I never believe anything I hear about Ukraine.
Yeah, I know.
To be sure. Zelensky is the president of that country who, for some reason, can find the time to leave his war-torn capital and come and
it's like he's on a fundraising
hang out
tour
with famous people and then ask it or demand, really. He's sort of making these demands lately.
Yeah, it's moved. It's
pulling
changed.
Climate change into the conversation.
I noticed that.
All sorts of funny things
strange.
he does. But basically pulling every string.
He senses the growing opposition?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure he does.
So.
Yeah. It's becoming more manipulative for sure.
Yeah.
But what I noticed about him this week was there's a woman that I have learned about it from other sources.
Yeah.
Abramovich, Maria, I think is her first name. Well known for her participation in open witchcraft. And so I was surprised to see surprised and not surprised to see Zelensky saying, I want to make her my ambassador to represent his country. She's well known for her connections with the Clintons and, Jay-Z and Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
And she claims to be a performance artist.
Yeah.
But all of her art is around really open occult witchcraft.
Yes.
And how it's just sort of being accepted
very
now.
open, but covered with this artist
Even
label.
Microsoft like wanted to have her represent them.
Yeah.
They had a commercial with her as the centerpiece and one of their new technologies.
Yeah.
Until the pushback, and then they just deleted the
Yeah.
the video.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of videos, you had even mentioned when we talked last night, but it was worth saying it showing itself up in music videos, lots of music videos,
More
occult images.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it used to be, you know, like Ozzy Osbourne or those guys, they were doing this sort of show, right? Of I'm a bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he famously bit the head off a bat in the 80s, right? And shocked people, which was what he was going for.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now it's not, it feels darker or more, like I went and I looked up a rapper and wanted to see her videos and see what she's about. And the first most popular video was her like naked, covered in blood and dancing with a demon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the song wasn't even about that. It was just like, what is going on?
So the Aussie stuff and whatnot, there was quite a bit of that in the 80s and late 70s. And it does seem to have been shock value, performance shock.
Yeah.
But now I agree with you. There's a different spirit to it that is almost exploratory and insidiously, I'm going to put it out here and dare to accuse me of anything because I'll just say it's artistry.
Well, and nothing is shocking anymore. I think that's part of it. So if all you can do is shock, you're numbing the population, and so you have to get more and more egregious.
Yeah.
So
Which
you can
is
make
Lady
that
Gaga's
argument.
career in the beginning.
Sure, right,
It's
yeah.
just shock, and it's following up on the Madonna. She was shock. You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other side of it too, though, is there's an open sort of a flagrant, like nobody's shocked now by somebody dancing for Satan or whatever, because it happened 3 years ago, and the Emmys do it every couple of years. They'll have a Satanism performance at the Emmy, you know. And so I don't know what it is about the music industry in particular. They seem to have just said, "Oh yeah, that's what we're about now," and Christianity has pulled back. This is actually a thought I've been having too. Is that there in the podcast world, right? We're trying to explore. There's a Christian podcast world, and then there's the pop culture, politics. You know, there's all these spheres, and nobody really overlaps. And you'll see occasionally a few Christians who are actually trying to engage with the kind of godless popular culture. But a lot of Christians, it's creating content about Christianity for Christians as if the rest of the world doesn't exist. And that doesn't seem healthy.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting that you say that when you say about the music industry, because I read some time ago, Sidney, I hope I get his last name right, it was French, Poitier, I think that's how you say it. Poitier? All right. Anyway, A Measure of a Man. Actually, quite a good biography. In our little promo, I'm going to do a couple biographies today, but not his, but it was actually well written and a good read. But what was interesting about it is he grows up in Haiti, I think, and he says the role of spirits in his life and the role of spirits in their community, and that he attributes his success and fame as an actor to the spirits that he asked for help from.
Yeah.
And so when you say about Hollywood, I wonder if there's some connection, or music videos and whatnot, I wonder if there's some connection with the element of this is the glory of the world. It's as Satan saying, I'll give you the kingdoms of the world if you'll bow your knee to me.
Right.
And if somebody says, I'll bow, I'm trading. And I think about this honestly, being transparent. Katy Perry. I don't know if you follow any of his music stuff. I think she's gifted, and I've liked some of her music. But her backstory is growing up in a Christian home, and she's walked away from that. Now, maybe there's been some elements of return in some portions recently, or just growing up. But I watched that. In fact, I know that she had a tattoo somewhere on her arm somewhere, and I think it might have just said God or Jesus. I'm not sure. And she said in some interview that she put it there so that she can look at it and remind herself, like, what to return to someday or something like that, right?
Man. Right.
Yeah, and it's like there's this sense of not realizing you are playing with fire, girl. I mean, this is not returning to, in a sense, might not be an option, so to speak.
There's a point very clearly where you harden your heart to such an extent that God just says,
that's right.
I'm not
that
calling
is
you
right.
back.
And I know when I was in high school, there was this unspoken element of I want to drink all the glory and pleasure of fun for myself and someday then repent and escape hell.
Right.
You know, but that's... Anyway, I wonder if there's this trade-off, especially in certain industries where there's glory.
So what
I'm
I've
gonna
seen
get-
in Hollywood, and I don't, I haven't, this is just my own observation watching careers of young performers, right? What you'll often see is someone in a breakout role where they, like, I think of, what's the girl's name from Hunger Games, Jennifer something.
Lawrence.
Yeah. So she had this breakout role in a sort of indie movie, and became suddenly famous.
Right.
And if you watch people when that happens, the next couple movies are these degrading. Often they have to
Sexualized.
participate in stuff that you're like, that movie was a hazing ritual. Are you going to go along with the demands
that's right.
of the producers and
Yeah.
the directors?
And for women, it's often some form of nudity.
It's nudity, it's weirdness. Timothy Chalamet has had this where he had this breakout role, and I don't remember what it was. He had a lot of small roles. Once he sort of became famous, his next big movie was portraying a gay relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
With an older man as a teenager. It was this like obvious, older gay men are allowed to sleep with 15-year-olds and nobody bats an eye.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence it looks like that he is
It's
gay.
will you bend the knee?
But will you
Roll.
degrade yourself publicly so
Yeah.
we know that you're one of us?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's,
I think there's something to that. That's sad. We do plan on talking a little bit about the repaganization, perhaps, but this is an ongoing topic, right? We're entering a time in our culture where the role of spirits are accelerating,
yeah.
and well, let's talk a couple Trump things real quick. I've
Okay.
got a couple. I think you had one. I forget
What would we do
yours
without
was.
Trump?
What did CNN
someday
do? They
someday
lost
Trump will
market
be
share.
gone, and then what will we say? We're never going to have this perpetual DeSantis segment, I think, no matter what happens.
No, there isn't. There's no one quite able to take up the oxygen in the room like him.
Yeah.
So I don't remember what your point was. You want to lead with yours, or do you want me to lead with mine here?
Okay, so I had this idea around why are people so loyal to Trump?
Oh,
And
yeah,
it
that's
connected
right.
with
Loyalty.
It connected with my work in schools. I've worked in schools of very predominantly wealthy communities and poor communities.
Yeah.
They're very different in how they think about school and their values about life in general.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And then I was listening to someone talking about class culture, and I constructed this idea that I wanted to share. Okay, the idea is that poor people, they're fixated on we need more money. And when you're legitimately poor, you need money to get by. Like you're just
Yeah.
trying to get to the
That's
next
the
month.
issue of your life.
And so when you don't, it's like when you don't have food to eat, all you think about is food. When you don't
Yeah.
have the money to make the things,
Yeah.
that's what you think about. But what the poor people do have is this intense loyalty to each other, right? To family or to their community, if it's a small community especially. And even when your family members have done terrible things and betrayed you, you're still going to defend them over the outsider, right? And that's pretty well known. When you get to the middle class, they now have the money consistently to, maybe they can get a little nicer car. They can get
not the
a
most
toy to play
pressing
with,
issue
right?
for them.
Money's not on the table.
Yeah.
So now what middle class people start to kind of hunger for is status, right? And so, yeah, they want to get rich, but it's really to be, like if you ask a middle class kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? They'll say a YouTuber, right? Or famous. Like they want to attain status. So when you go to the wealthy people who kind of have obtained the status.
Wealth and status.
Right? And they'll talk a lot about, well, I want to have a legacy. I want to perpetuate. And what they really are longing for, according to some research that I was reading, is loyalty. That people would be loyal to them but it's sort of like they burned these bridges. They betrayed some people on the way up, and now they lost it. And so the rich people want what the poor have. And the poor people want what the middle class have, and the middle class want what the rich have. And it goes round and round. And Trump's magic, so to speak, is that as a wealthy guy with some semblance of status, he's gained the loyalty of the poor in ways that other rich and influential and elite people have never been able to do.
Except maybe Reagan.
And I think that's part of why they hate Trump so much.
Yeah.
Because he got what they never could get.
Which is crazy because I think you're probably right, the jealousy factor, and yet they would hate themselves for it because they despise him for buying cheeseburgers for the World Series baseball team, right? They mock him and despise him for even having a whiff of blue collar about him as a billionaire.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that is because this part of the status that they are obtaining is to say we're above
We're above those things.
Right. And he wouldn't do it.
Which is then ironic because they're jealous for what he's got, but there's no way in H double hockey sticks that they would ever want to lower themselves to be the same way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think there's some of that too, for sure. He also, but the thing is they gave him all the fame and the glory that he wanted, right? He's on Oprah and every talk show forever through the 90s.
Yeah.
Getting asked by Oprah in the 90s, do you ever want to be president,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
But when he actually then became a Republican, that's when the real betrayal and
Yeah.
that's where the hatred comes from, I think, is
Yeah.
to say, you were one of us, we owned you, and now you go to them.
Yeah.
I think that's where it really
Yeah.
roots from.
Which is also, I think, interesting and even ironic because I don't think fundamentally he is a Republican, but I think what he loves our country.
Yeah,
loves
that
our
does seem to be
country.
true. Yeah.
And what I think he watched, first of all, Obama mocked him.
Yeah.
And then I think he watched what Obama did do as a president and felt it was undermining to our country, and he wanted our country to be great.
Yeah.
He wants to build big, beautiful buildings. I think he really is truthful in that.
Right.
He loves to make something, look at that, that's awesome.
Right.
And he feels immensely gratified.
And put his name on it.
And his
in
name
gold
on it.
letters.
Sure, you can put all these egotistical elements
yeah.
to it. But I think down at root, there is a God glorifying honor aspect of, I want to build good, cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to build America. I want to make it better, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think he's ever really a Republican technically, but he looked at the parties. Which one can I do that with?
Sure. Yeah.
I'll pick those guys. I think they are more inclined towards that.
Which is tough
And
because
just
that,
harden
like when he
his
backs
positions.
off on his pro-life, like
Yes.
he's been doing lately.
Yes.
You
Or
know, the
modifies
old
it.
line Republicans. Well, Republican, even
Yeah.
that doesn't
Yeah.
have a clear definition
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
But now we don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and so that's been for the negative and the positive, right? So I agree with you. The stuff, and it's funny. I keep thinking about what we said last night about this topic, and do we say it's so hard to not
Just go
make
with
yourself.
it.
I know,
Just
but
go with it.
But the point is that whatever modifications he's suggesting about the debate with regards to abortion. You get the sense that he is he stretches the party, and he is stretched in some ways that might not be good, and he's stretched in other ways that they needed it and couldn't have gotten it anywhere else.
Yeah.
So for example, your whole point about the working class, there has been a slow shift over time that this has been taking place, but it has solidified under Trump.
Yeah.
The Republican Party is now the party of blue-collar working class America. And it used to be the Democrat Party.
I think it's a tentative hold, though. I don't think their loyalty is to the Republicans at all. I think it's to Trump.
Well, that's what's to be seen,
the trick.
right?
Because
I kind of
and
agree
you
with
see
you.
the Republicans thinking they can exploit that. The Mitt Romney guys. And those what I like to call them is the Chamber of Commerce Republicans.
Yeah.
Those guys aren't going to ever get that
Yeah.
loyalty.
I've wondered if we'll ever abandon and the idea of Democrat Republican as party names and get replaced. And I've thought of two things. One, I thought the Patriot Party. Kind of a cool word, kind of a cool name.
Yeah.
But it is this confluence of people across all spectrums that are really the Republican leadership is not for the Republican Party or the
Right.
Republican people.
That's right.
They are really more aligned with the Democrat Party in their allegiances. Not necessarily would they vote for all the same things, but fundamentally there's an in versus out, and they're a part of in government.
So I've heard different theories as to why that is. So on the one hand, it's that the Republicans are actually liberal too. They're just willing to lie to us.
Maybe some.
On
of
the
that
other
is
hand, what I see more is there's a lot of Republicans who start from a losing mentality. Like, we can't win this. Therefore, what they're really doing is like negotiating with themselves.
I think that's
halfway
true.
to the Democrat position before the fight's even started.
And I think when you throw in the element of media stardom, media fame, and the media will not stroke their egos, they'll stroke John McCain and they'll stroke Mitt Romney because they're using them. And so I think some of these people trade it. They make that same trade-off we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And I'll compromise my positions to get stroked by the media. Because if I'm Matt Gaetz, or I don't even know how you say his last name, Gates, he's abhorred and hated. Right? And he yet seems to be standing up for.
It's pretty impressive.
It is very impressive.
Yeah.
And the guy in the Senate who's holding up all the military general promotions. Have you read about him at all?
I don't know.
Oh, so the Senate. So Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney. What's the guy who had the stroke? The Senate leader, Mitch McConnell.
Oh, yeah.
He's not. He doesn't fight. He's not fighting as a minority.
Well, you
Chuck
don't get into that
Schumer
position
fought
unless you're a
more.
backroom swindler. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with you. However, when the Republicans had the Senate, Chuck Schumer fought tooth and nail.
Yeah, right.
Mitch McConnell has not.
Republicans
fought.
don't.
They don't.
Right.
So they just say, well, we're going to play along and I'll stroke your back when you're in power because then you're going to stroke my. And they don't do it the other way. And the media doesn't join them, right?
Well, I think I think they do. So I think Democrats will side with you in private and then fight you in public. Republicans will do the other way around.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But there's this senator, and he is holding up all the military nominations and he's forcing them to go one by one through the whole entire process instead of en bloc.
Yeah.
Because he's saying the military funding abortion,
Right.
and he has 3 or 4 issues. He goes, "This
Gender
is not right. You
transitions
change
funded by the military.
You can't do these things. So here's what I'm going to do." And he's fighting like a Republican. I'm holding the purse string, so to speak, but it's in this general nomination area.
Well,
And
it's the
thing that
actual
I don't
checks
even
and balance
remember-
of Congress.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's like that Matt Gaetz. And actually, for those of us who are down the line in the party, so to speak, or that perspective of conservatism, it's like that's what we want. That's what we respect. That's what we expect our leaders to be.
Right.
But they're not doing that.
They're not actual fighters.
So I've wondered if the parties will shift and adjust to where the uniparty really becomes a party.
Yep.
And then the patriot people, which would include current Democrats and Republicans, because blue collar people are by and large are patriotic,
Right.
even if they have a different social perspective on welfare, let's say, whatever.
Right.
Would those allegiances shift because of this bigger enemy at the gates?
Well, and it's one thing to be a wealthy, successful Republican who says people shouldn't be on welfare. It's another thing to be a poor, working class person who says people shouldn't be exploiting welfare.
That's true.
But both can find,
true.
agreement sometimes
true.
in the Republican Party.
And it strikes me as funny. We're going so far. This is going to be so much different than last night. But it strikes me as funny as a Richmond from Richland guy. I forget his name now. Oliver Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
His line that has gotten the most critique has been the fudge lines.
That's right.
Not the miners on an island.
No, yeah.
Isn't that absurdly angering?
Well, so here's the crazy thing, right? I was talking to a friend of mine who's in Portland, and I was talking about this song. Have you heard about it? And he's connected with music, and he knows. And he was like, "No, what is it?" And I quoted that. Listen to this line, and I played that. Right?
Which one? The miners?
The miners. Like, I wish they would stick up for miners, not just miners on an island somewhere. And he looked at me straight and he said, "What's that a reference to?"
Oh my goodness!
Like he doesn't even.
Isn't that?
And it just
astounding?
reinforces we have totally separate versions of reality.
Yeah.
And we're only an hour apart.
Yeah.
Right, from Portland to where we are.
Yeah. Well, so Trump, the loyalty. I think that's a good observation. I think that's a general truth, a maxim, so to speak. I've thought about it in terms of the couple Trump things I've noticed lately is I watched him with Tucker Carlson, and then I happened to watch him with. I wanted to say Megyn King. Where's that? Megyn Kelly. These interviews, and what struck me was, and I enjoyed the Tucker one, and the Megyn Kelly I enjoyed part of it as well. But what struck me is his answering is not as vivacious. He is my notes say it seems to me he's leaking some vitality. And I would make a distinction between Biden has gone into, I remember watching Biden's vitality begin to slip. He always was a guy who stuck his foot in his mouth as a speaker. And so, there are temperaments that are like that. They have assets and negatives. But then you started seeing the element of age, an element of decline, but he still had his faculties. Now he is in, it appears to be full-blown dementia and old age dementia.
Yeah.
He's crossed a line to where it's not even a question anymore, really. I don't think Trump is that, and I'm not saying that, but I do see the beginning of slowdown.
Right.
When he was answering Megyn Kelly in particular, he was not really answering all of her questions. And he didn't do it with Tucker, and I just wrote it off. He doesn't have, like Tucker, the one that I was struck with the most was, do you think they'll assassinate you? And he asked it 3 different times in 3 different ways.
Right.
And he never addressed it. And I thought, well, maybe that's prudent. I could never be in politics. I'd want to be honest. And if you ask a question, I want to interact with it. And that's not always wise.
Right.
Right. So but then when I saw Megyn Kelly do it on a different subject, I think it was about the vaccine stuff. Have you considered, would you regret any of what you did with Fauci? It was a great question.
Yeah.
And you know what? Not quite. You were a little frustrated with Tucker as a little softballish, and I would agree a little bit. But this wasn't even softballish, but it teed up something for him to talk. It gave him an opportunity, and he did not take it.
Right.
What I mean by taking it is he actually even didn't interact well with the question.
Right.
He did. His answer was to go back and say, if you remember at the time, and it's not an unfair way to answer this.
Sure.
We all didn't know, none of us knew what was going on. Was this the next bubonic plague, basically? Mm-hmm. I remember feeling that. I was going to drive down to Eugene to work right when this started happening, and I turned around 10 minutes down the road and said, Mike, don't be a stubborn idiot.
Right.
This could be bad. You should just wait.
Well,
just turn around and
it's
go
one
home
thing
and
to
wait a
feel
little
that
bit.
way in March, April, May.
It's
It's
and
another
that's what
thing
happened, yeah.
in September, October,
But that's what he
November.
appealed to, and it wouldn't have been a bad defense, but it doesn't get him out of 8 months later, he's still got Fauci out there, and people are starting to hate it, right?
Yeah.
And he had the opportunity to say, probably to say I made some mistakes, but he couldn't do it.
Well, if you're running for office, right, you're supposed to be accentuating your successes.
I know.
2 big things he did.
That's true.
The thing is, that's not a success, but that's what he's trying to do, right? The other one that I think he could have run with is the Roe v. Wade, especially if he's talking to his
Supreme
base
Court
in a primary,
nominations,
right?
yeah.
That I got you Roe v. Wade just
Yeah.
like you asked for. No one
That's
else
true.
got you that.
Yeah.
But that's the thing he's running away from. So the thing that his base would actually appreciate about.
Well, wait, when you said running away from, he has made statements recently in which he's saying the lines we're drawing he thinks are too
He's saying
strong.
that
So
the heartbeat bills and the pro-life bills that are passed
He's
now
caused
because
some
of Roe v. Wade are
consternation.
stupid.
Yeah.
Right? And what he's doing is he's taking a swipe at DeSantis, but he's doing it from the left of DeSantis instead of
Yeah.
from the right.
Yeah.
And especially when you're in a primary, you should be always attacking from the right side so that your base looks at your opponent
Correct.
in the wrong light.
But that's also traditionally in the primaries. This is not a traditional primary.
But this is how Trump won the primary 4 years ago.
But
Well,
he
7
doesn't
years
have to
ago
do
now.
that anymore. He's 40 some odd points up. He doesn't even have to go to the debates. He's not going to go to the second one, and he won't lose
I don't
because
think.
of it.
I think he will.
No.
I think the 40 points up thing is a smokescreen. I don't think it's real.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be the nominee. I know that's my phone buzzing at me. I don't know why. I've got it on silent. But did you, by the way, last night hear some music playing while in the middle of what we're doing?
No.
Okay. So anyway, Trump leaking a little vitality. The other
Yeah.
thing I wanted to ask about that, when I expected to say it, I thought to myself, I'm curious to your response to it, because what I've noticed, one of the differences, you're similar to my wife in that you disliked Trump from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you nor my wife voted for Trump in 2016,
Right.
but both of you voted for Trump in 2020. In a sense, he proved himself in a little bit to you, but you still did it holding your nose. I'm talking about my wife and putting you guys in the same category.
Okay.
You voted for him, but you still didn't like him. So
Right.
my wife does not like Trump still today.
Yeah.
I put on a rally maybe a month ago just to see one of his rallies, and she's rolling her eyes, making these kinds of
Stressed
things
out.
by his exaggerated statements and his presentation of
See,
who
and
he
I
is.
think he's funny.
Yeah.
Like,
so you guys might not
I've
share
watched-
with my wife, but
Yeah, I've watched some things, but yeah.
yeah. But so my curiosity was about Trump leaking vitality. So I'm saying it, I still am supportive of him. I wondered how you would hear it and if it would feed into you saying, yeah, see, he's not. I mean, even the polling. Now, here's the truth. We don't even know how polling is part. I think polling is like 80% creating a narrative rather than getting a reflection.
Especially
of
this
popular.
early.
Es-
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even trust him at all. But you and I stand with different perspectives, even on the polling. but you dislike Trump kind of, and I dislike him less.
I've got a
And
bias
so,
for sure.
Yeah, you have a little bias, and I'll say I have a little bias. Let's just put a little in both of us.
I'm rooting for him to lose, I'll tell you.
Yeah, and
when it
I'm
comes
not.
to the primary.
Yeah. So
I mean, I could vote for him in 2020 for the simple reason that it's him or chaos, right? I mean, we're literally burning in the streets.
did you mean 2024?
No, 2020.
2020, okay.
Like, because I didn't vote for him in 2016
Right.
because I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think he's an effective
This
leader.
is the right time and primaries to say, I don't want this guy, I want that guy.
Right. But
From
if
a
it came
political
down to
perspective.
Trump Biden again, or Trump Newsom, or Trump Michelle,
Yeah.
I would vote for Trump.
Yeah. I hear
I
you
wouldn't want to, but I
completely.
would.
I understand.
The problem is, I don't think he can win.
Yeah.
Even in the if he gets into the he's going to lose. They're going to pull all the strings. They're
Well,
going to
I'm
do the
with you on
things they
that,
did
but
before.
yes, for
And I don't think
different
it's getting
reasons.
better. And we've talked about in the past, that there's a limit of how much they can cheat. There's only so many ballots they can pull in certain districts, and which districts they can
Well,
control.
they've already crossed that line because
But here's what
everybody
I'm seeing.
knows.
Because if you look at the last midterm, where we thought it was going to be a red wave, and this is consistent in history that when an unpopular president in office is going to lose his midterm, that's always going to happen. And so we thought, this is really going to happen because let's go Brandon. Everybody's against Biden. So this is the Democrats are going to fall. And then they just didn't.
Yeah.
Republicans gained a little bit, but it wasn't except in Florida, right? And what happened in Florida is DeSantis cleaned up the voting rules. He cleaned up the registers. He cleaned up the process. He made all the votes get counted within a few hours. It was this is going to be tight, and we're going to do it correctly.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, they can count all night. They can pause counting. They can do what they want.
And in particularly certain areas, so Arizona and Kari Lake, it was very clear she won, and there was a representative there as well, and they stole both
all
of those.
sorts of shenanigans
because
going on in Arizona.
It's in swing states.
But what I'm seeing now is, and there was like a special election just a few days ago where a Republican candidate was ahead by 12 and lost by 3, or something like that. And it's like, well, if they've established this ability to influence elections, even if you look at how tech companies can influence elections just by saying, because the tech companies know who's a Republican, who's a Democrat, right? They've got a profile on everybody.
Yeah.
Well, all they have to do on Facebook, let's say, is send reminders to the Democrats to vote that day. And everybody else.
These are things
just
that
don't.
are actually
And that'll
happening.
swing the vote a certain percent.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so you've got all these mechanisms in place, plus
That's right.
extra, ballot boxes in Democrat regions, plus all this, millions and millions of dollars put into this process. They're not going to give that up. They're not going to say, well, that was for Trump, but now we'll stop. They're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I have no reason to think they're not expanding the
I'm in
operation.
complete agreement with you. That's why I have predicted Newsom is going to win. He's not even in the race yet. And we'll talk about Michelle Obama in just a second about that. But it's because of the cheating. I don't think it has been overcome, and I don't think it will be right now.
Right.
So we share that. The Trump leaking vitality, my curiosity on second thought is in sense of here we sit down and we have a kind of less for Trump and a kind of more for Trump person. What does him leaking vitality in light of Biden having really crossed over into a dementia realm? So there was an article, and I'll just combine it with
Well,
this
and is he
thing.
just another boomer that won't let go? That's what I think of Trump too.
As Trump?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think that at all. I think I think not another boomer who won't let go. At this point, I would put him in the category of he got beat and he doesn't like to lose and he doesn't want to let go. But I don't see that as connected to being a boomer. I don't think it's
There's just that's like our whole government is run by these boomers who just won't let go of power.
I mean, that's the age. Yeah, I agree with you. There's an age.
Even
factor
Obama,
there.
I looked it up. He's a boomer too.
Oh, did you look at it? Because we talked about this last night.
Yeah.
But anyway, James Carville, a political operative strategist, writes an article. I'm pretty sure it's Carville. I should have looked it up. But he writes an article about, and he says Biden's too old to run.
Yeah.
Let's face it, folks. He doesn't use the word dementia, but he puts out there what everybody knows and everybody sees. All the falling down, all the word. I mean, if Kamala Harris is a word salad.
Like he just invents things.
Oh, it's just spectacularly amazing. And then when you think about him, he is an old man now. Maybe he's getting his just due for being a corrupt politician, but it's also sad.
Yeah.
And you think this is elder abuse, frankly.
For real.
Yeah, for real.
I mean, I thought that during the election, and it's only gotten worse.
My own opinion is that first election, he was already crossing a line during that season.
Yeah.
Which is why they put him in the basement. It wasn't because of COVID. And the first debate, I thought Trump would clean up the floor with him, and that's not what happened. He held his own. I completely
Trump also
believe,
just coasted into that. He didn't even prep. It was like he was disregarding the whole thing.
and that was probably unwise, but you can understand why you would do that when you're thinking, this guy, this is going to be easy.
Yeah.
I personally believe, without evidence,
Okay.
that they gave him drugs.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he performed spectacular.
I mean, there's a lot of evidence that Trump's on some kind of upper every day of the last
I've never
50
heard
years.
that or
Oh, yeah, like some kind of
seen
amphetamine.
that or-
Not like, so there's meth and then there's just good old amphetamines. They're just uppers, right?
Yeah.
And they keep you going.
Elvis, the Beatles.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, so Carville says Biden's too old. And as he goes on and he says these things, and what he's leading you down as a reader is, on my side of the aisle, is to say, oh, they're finally admitting this.
Right.
Oh, good, they're finally saying what, you know. And then he has this Biden's too old, da da da. And this is an age that's inappropriate, like Trump, to be president, and just goes on with the Biden article.
Yeah.
It's like,
'Cause Trump's old
that's
too.
what this is. I actually admired it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because it is a losing issue.
Right.
How they want to get rid of Biden. They know they have to get rid. They're willing to stab him in the back. They don't care about that.
Oh, yeah.
But how do we do it in a way that doesn't look like it's, this is, so Newsom is stabbing in the back by being friendly and smiling and saying how great a president he is.
Right.
That's my opinion. And he's gotten the inside word from Nancy, and here's the way to do it,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And so it's not that they wouldn't stab him in the back openly, but how do you do it to make it? And what they've done is they've taken the process of getting rid of Biden and turned it into an asset to attack Trump.
Right.
And I think that is so clever, even though I think it's disgusting, but it's so clever.
Yeah.
It's why I would never be in politics. I could never stand that kind of dishonesty underlying your communication.
Right. Yeah.
But it's interesting. And okay, hey, Newsom and Obama, Michelle, real quick. Because I think it was Ted Cruz who said, he did an interview recently and he said, here's the plan, the Democrats' plan. They're going to dump Biden, which everybody thinks too, and then they're going to parachute in, those are his words, and it was a great word, parachute in Michelle Obama.
Right.
And now I had predicted the same thing that I predicted, but I did it with Newsom.
Yeah.
What do you think? And my question to you is Michelle Obama, is she wired that way?
My impression of her is that she is. She's as active as Barack is.
Well, so you use active, and I agreed with that. She's an activist in a sense.
And I think there's an activist nature to their marriage. We were talking about that biography, right? And how he had this long-term relationship and he had to, basically he couldn't marry a white girl and then try to represent the black community. And he knew that. And there's a little aspect to that. But I say that, the reality is, the reason I think they do it for Michelle more than they would for Newsom is that if this is Obama's third term, why wouldn't he want a fourth?
So from an Obama perspective, from Barack, totally have Michelle.
Yeah.
He doesn't want Newsom in because Newsom's going to take over the party.
Yeah.
It's his party then.
And he's running the federal.
And I think he has the capacity to do it. Newsom does. And so it would be the twilight. It would be the end for Barack.
I think Newsom wants to position himself to be the guy that Barack will pass the torch to.
That would be the win for him.
But I don't think he's ready to do it.
Barack is ready. I agree
I think
with
he
you
wants to
on
keep
this.
that power. Therefore, he's going to put Michelle in.
I totally agree. So I know. I kind of, my only reservation about that is she doesn't strike me. So when we talked last night about this in terms of like, is she like Hillary? I got the sense that Michelle Obama liked going on Oprah because she liked being famous and being fawned over. I think that Hillary goes on Oprah because she's calculating a political gain from it.
Yeah. So the question is it that Michelle likes it, or is it she just better at it than Hillary is?
Possibly. I mean, that would be
because the other side, the big advantage for Michelle is, Barack Obama, his big thing was, if you criticize me, maybe it's because you're racist. Now Michelle's got sexist to add to it.
That's true.
She's in a position where all of Trump's tactics, right, all of his personal attacks are just going to fall flat against her.
Or be much more challenging.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because now you combine the suburban women who are put off by Trump.
Yep.
And now you got the inner city folks.
Yep.
Who are still going to say, well, we got to vote for the black folks, right?
Yep.
We've got to stick together.
Yep.
And Biden says if you don't vote for me, you're not
Identity
really black.
politics.
Yeah.
The identity politics. Now we're going to get to your Jesus King and a little bit national in just a sec, but let's wrap this part up.
Okay.
Because I think it's interesting. Something I've had on my list for a while is Trump's running mate, the ideal running mate. And this guy wrote an article, Alan Goodhart, and he has 9 traits here. But the first is this: has to be a woman.
Yeah.
Do you think it's?
Well, I think Vivek is hoping it'll be him.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
I
think
it
it has to be. He's faded in the last few weeks. Like I haven't heard from him.
He has.
I don't know what's going on, but I'm not paying super close attention.
Yeah.
So I just wait for it to pop into my little radar.
Is it he's fading or he was on a flash burn?
I think he got a lot of good press.
Yeah.
He was on some of the podcasts I follow, and I think that's part of it too.
Part of it also is he's come under more increased scrutiny. Now people are starting to show out inconsistencies in his positions.
That's right.
And frankly, I've seen several articles that said Nikki Haley was right. Sir, you're inexperienced.
Well, he's a really good talker, but
I agree.
Part of what he's good at is saying things in a way that's like, well, you said the opposite last week, but you're telling people what they want to hear.
Yeah, that's right. And like in his book about Trump, apparently, which I didn't read, but I just saw quotes of it, he said Trump was stupid in saying that the election was stolen, right?
Right. Now he's kind of backing it up.
Yeah. So is he an opportunist? The most recent article I read said Vivek is out for Vivek.
Well,
this is the opportunity.
I think everybody is in a little.
I know. I agree.
That's a hard.
It is. That's true.
The thing I see with him, though, and what I respect, is that he went on the long form podcasts. He went and sat for 2 hours, and DeSantis won't do
completely
it. And
agree.
I think if you can't do that, you shouldn't be.
And he's clearly thought about the issues as well that are really tearing our country.
Yeah.
He's articulate, not just in the articulate.
He's visionary.
It is. He's actually spent time thinking what's going on, what are people saying, and why. And I can get behind this, and however much is sincere or not, he's able to say it in such a way that people like you and me who think about things way more than average, we hear him thinking, finally somebody's saying things we're thinking about.
Yeah.
Right?
I think Trump's got to go with I think he does need to go with a woman in the sense that suburban women are who he lost. That's why he lost. The Republicans generally have done okay in the suburbs.
Because I don't like it when people say that, why he lost, and they point out some cause that has a legitimacy in it.
Yeah.
But it's not why he lost. I think he got the most votes in the entire American history of our country.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, he did get that. If you just take off the 500,000 or 1 million votes that were added to Biden, right? He would have won. But I say that to say, even still, if you look demographically at where he lost ground, that is where.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this said a woman middle-aged so that they could be an heir, which makes sense. Interesting quality. Unfailingly loyal to Trump and MAGA.
Well, that's going to be his problem, right? Because
I do think that's a problem.
He can't. You default to the sort of the Sarah Palin model. That's not going to work.
I completely agree
and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, who's been in trouble the last couple of weeks. But all those folks, that's not who you're going to get. That's not going to bring in the suburban moms because they don't look to them.
I know. It's like a double-edged sword. The more you go with this loyalty thing, because it's good, the more you lose on the people you need to get.
Right.
The more you go with an independent mind that can appeal to them, the more you make a conflict with Trump.
That is Nikki Haley's strength, to be honest.
I totally agree with you.
The problem I see is that Nikki Haley still represents the bow to corporate, right? She wants to bow down. That's right.
I know.
She wants to bow down to Disney and get them to move, right?
I totally agree.
So
she's
Chamber of Commerce just like the others.
I was so excited about her when Trump first appointed her and started listening to her, and I thought she could be the next president.
Sure.
She could. There's a lot of factors for it. But then the more I heard her say and the positions she took, it just upset me. And it's like, you are just parroting these lines. You're part of establishment.
Yeah.
Now, you may criticize establishment here and there, but you're more a part of it than you are not. And it turned me off.
Yeah.
I'll run through these quick. Doesn't seek media attention, so he won't outshine Trump.
Right.
Totally
Good
agree,
luck.
right?
Yeah.
Perceived by voters as moderate and able to influence his impolite way of communicating at times.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing Pence, early Mike Pence, right?
That's what I think too. Yeah. Leadership in the U.S., has some experience, let's say, appeals to moderates, a business world entrepreneur, military background would be nice.
But think about how that went with Pence. It didn't go great.
Okay, wait a minute now. Fair.
I mean,
from
this is
today's
Trump's
perspective.
weakness, right? He wants the yes men around him.
Okay, but wait. Do we know that it didn't go? We don't really know for 3.5 years how it went. It seemed to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, everything about Trump's presidency seems to be okay until the last year.
Well,
And that's
he
when
burned
they
through a lot of people pretty quick.
He did. There was a revolving
Trump-
door in a lot of ways.
You get the idea, perhaps, that Mike Pence. I have actually come to believe that Mike Pence stayed on purpose and bit his tongue and lacked the loyalty that Trump thought he had with him. And it was seen then. I actually agreed that I think Mike Pence should have gone to the Senate and should have said to these states, you don't seem to have a clarity about your electors. You go back and figure it out.
Right.
I think he had the legal ability to do that, which was evidenced by the fact that after this was crossed, this hurdle, they changed the rules.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that proves he did have the ability. And he says, I didn't have the ability, and Trump was asking me to overturn. And I think that's not true. I think he didn't. I think he had his moment for Trump to be defeated.
Well, and part of what I've heard people say is that the plan that night, or for January 6th, I guess that day, was that they would go through the alternate electors and lay out their case.
Yes.
That was
supposed
the
to be.
intention.
Yes.
And then the riot interrupted
That's
it.
exactly what I think was the underlying strategy.
And so when they came back that night after the riot and everything was cleared, now they're saying, we're not having out anything. We're just voting and getting this done.
I agree with you.
And it was like the temple of democracy has been desecrated.
Yeah.
Right? I remember listening that night. How many times are they going to say the temple of democracy?
Yeah.
And it was this it was a sacrilegious event now.
That's right. And I believe I also read that because of the riot and whatever, by enabling a little bit of a state of emergency, different Senate rules kicked in.
Yeah.
And so they were able to say, no, we're not doing that. We're just doing this vote. And so, strategic. All right. Let's talk a little nationalism. Jesus is king. Let's do your question and let's roam around this topic a little bit.
All right. So I was having a conversation with some guys. This was at our Manly Beach Day a couple weeks ago. And one of the questions, we talk, and I don't know why this is actually. I'm curious if you have thoughts. I asked my wife at women's events, nobody ever says, what does it really mean to be a woman? But it seems like that's the perennial question at every men's event, right? Women's events, it's really just saying, well, now that the men are gone, we can be a little more
honest. Other than the
honest.
current issue of what is woman, take that aside, you're right. That's never
But even
something,
then, it's not the women's.
it's
The
not
women
the
aren't
same
asking
topic.
that question. The
I
men
know.
are. But at any rate, I think it's an important question. I don't think it's worth skipping. What does it mean to be a man? I think the lack of that answer has led to some of the problems we're facing in our culture.
So wait, on that, do you think some of it is because women, you're really referencing church groups in a sense, when women get together,
right.
that they have a more unified, not necessarily complete, but a more unified perspective on this than if you throw out into the world? Because I do think that women, I'll use the word struggle, but I probably don't mean that word. There is conflict about, let's say there's a group of women and one works and one stays at home, or 5 work and 5 stay at home.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of tension about, are you being faithful to your children or not? And I think there's guilt in some of them, and there's not guilt, and maybe there's judgment and accusation, but I'm not sure that they bring that up at a retreat or talk about it.
I think there's definitely is this, like, we're all, as mothers, here's what we struggle with.
Yes. Yeah.
I think women have that advantage in identity because mothering is just,
That's
it's
a good
ingrained
point.
in who you are in a way that
And
fatherhood
that's
isn't.
shared no matter what the decision of work.
Yeah.
They share that bond. That's a good.
Right.
That's a good point.
So in
men.
that discussion, then we were trying to say, okay, what does it mean individually to be a man? But we were trying to expand it out. So one of the questions I asked the group was, what would it look like in our town? I'm trying to think about taking dominion of the earth, be like having a successful vision. Like if our church was successful, if there was revival, right? That's a word I didn't use, but I'm thinking of. If 2/3 of our town became Christian, what would it change about our town? If Jesus was king of like the majority, the established culture of our town, how would it be different? How would businesses be different, right? What laws would be different? How would the schools run differently? And actually try to cast a vision among these guys to say, we could build something that'll last, a culture, a Christian culture, right? Not Christian culture within the church that we all listen to Christian music, but a culture in our town that's Christian, that's influenced in this really heavenly way.
The values of the kingdom of Jesus.
Yeah. So the question So I don't think that's nationalism, but rather it's saying, what's the picture of locally that we're actually trying to do? What are we trying to do here? Is it just, I'm going to talk to my friend or my coworker?
Now, when you say I don't think it's nationalism, because this does connect to the topic and conversation we've been having, what do you mean by that? I don't think it's nationalism. Do you mean that just because we're talking about a small town?
Yeah.
Or do you?
I mean, I think when I promote, or if I say I agree with nationalism, I'm saying it as opposed to globalism. But if you actually ask me, I would say I'm a localist. I want all the decision-making power to happen locally.
The vast majority is by far the healthiest way.
I want the minimal federal government.
Yeah.
I want a mediocre.
Starting with families.
And what I like to say
your
is
neighbors.
The way I say it is, and teach it to my sons is, with my wife, I'm a communist. Right? What's mine is yours.
Yeah.
With my kids, I'm a socialist. Each gets what they need. With my town, I'm a liberal. With my state, I'm a conservative, like minimal, please, from Oregon. And then with the federal government, I'm almost libertarian, right? Just stay out of it.
Yeah.
So I want the more local control, but even then I would need a vision. So in the sense that nationalism is, I do want Christ to be king of our nation. In that way, I'm a nationalist. But in this question, I'm really saying it locally. What's the local, what would it look like here? And it wouldn't necessarily look the same, in Maine or in Florida or somewhere else if Christ was king there.
Right.
We want a picture
Everybody's
of it here.
facing their own circumstances.
Yeah.
So let me just restate one of your phrases, and I want you to tell me if it says the same thing you mean or if it says it differently and not quite what you meant. When you said that he would be king of the majority and culture, and that what I would restate that as, and wondering if you're asking, let's say there's an awakening, and he's the king of the majority of the people that live in our town.
Right.
Therefore, out of that, what would the culture of our town become like?
Yeah.
And to me, that separates, his kingship is over these people, but it influences the culture.
Yeah.
And because I have a reservation, and this is where we start getting in, what do we mean when we talk to each other? You keep saying the king of the town or the culture, and I think, oh, no, I want to draw him back to his kingdom of the people, but then those people live in this town and culture, and what would come through them to change it, because he's their king now.
Right.
Instead of meaning, and I'm gathering that you don't mean like he got elected mayor of the town. That's not what you're meaning.
That'd be a funny election.
Yeah. But
Put
you're
Jesus on the
meaning it
ballot.
really through his disciples, because I'm maintaining two kingdoms.
Yeah.
That in the one, he's gathered the majority of the people out of this kingdom of our town. They've gone into his kingdom, but now they still live in our town, so how would it change our town? How would it change our kingdom?
Yeah, and I don't...
No, what about Sermon on the Mount on that?
Tell me
Because
more.
we talked about a little bit about this last night, so some of this we're going to talk about, bring it up almost as if we're referencing something we already said, and we did. The Sermon on the Mount that lays out a kingdom of heaven way of life.
Okay.
It talks about, well, there's a lot of things, turning the other cheek. It talks about how you deal with your money.
Sure.
It talks about what you are in terms of salt and light as you live in this culture that still doesn't embrace your king. You've changed your mind.
Right.
Now you're part of another kingdom primarily, but you're still in this town's kingdom. But now you have different values.
Okay.
And so would the Sermon on the Mount be a reservoir of values that would say your citizenship in this town would more and more reflect that?
So the way I look at the Sermon on the Mount is that Jesus is taking the law, right? And when you look at the Old Testament law, in particular the Moses' law, right? And say, okay, this is our model for how to build a government, how to construct laws and run a government. And then what Jesus does is saying, the law is not enough to obtain a right relationship with God. The law is what you need to run a government. It's what you need to have a society, right? So you can have a Christian government because it's reflecting the laws of God, but that's not going to make individuals Christian just because they live in that country.
Agreed.
Right? So it's not enough, but it is still good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what Jesus is
corrals
doing,
the culture.
right? And it also sets up a right judgment of each of our hearts. So in other
That's
words,
true.
in a country where slavery is legal, people are generally not going to be convicted in their hearts or feel guilty for having slaves. They're going to be like, yeah, this is good, right? It's what we always do. And so making the right laws around slavery is going to create the right kind of heart condition in that setting. But still, right, it's still going to be, no heart will be transformed by those laws.
That's correct.
It will simply be the impetus to establish them.
Yes.
So you don't have a Christian society just because you have Christian laws, but in
That's
a Christian
right.
society, you will have Christian laws.
Or laws that reflect the virtues that are in Christianity.
Correct, yeah.
So slavery is an interesting one to bring up, very interesting, because it's thorny.
Yeah.
Because the Old Testament does not abolish slavery.
That's right.
It basically gives you parameters with which to live with it in a way that minimizes harm.
Right.
You have to account for yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't undo this thing. The New Testament doesn't ever come across and undo it either. But the New Testament, I read a fascinating book by George Marsden about the Civil War and the conflict. He traces our current difficulties to the Civil War in this way.
A lot of people do, yeah.
That in the Civil War and the issue of slavery, you had Christians who disagreed on what the Bible meant to do with slavery.
Yeah.
Everybody could agree where it had come from, but they disagreed on the New Testament. Some said the New Testament never undoes it. We
Right.
don't have to undo it. And these are Southern, evangelical, Robert Dabney, different people that are in the South, good men.
Sure.
You had other people saying, no, you're right, the New Testament doesn't undo it, but every heartbeat of the New Testament blood is about love and freedom and undoes slavery.
Yeah.
No verse, no command, but the whole thing together is completely inconsistent with slavery.
Well, and the central metaphor of the Old Testament, reflecting on Christ, is God's people being set free from slavery.
That's true.
That's what baptism is about, is getting out of slavery.
So those people argued that, yes, it's the Bible. And so what Marsden ends up pointing out is that Christendom in America began to be divided. And no longer did they say or could say to themselves or to the culture, we're Christians and we follow the Bible.
Because there was so much disagreement.
They could say it, but everyone else looked like, you guys don't even agree on this huge issue.
Right.
And he's saying what that did is that fractured the American church, so to speak, and it's never been the same since.
So I'm going to make it more
That's
complicated.
interesting.
Okay, so here's my argument. And I've heard this from leftists, but I think they're
Yeah.
right. And that is that we still haven't abolished slavery today. So if you look at a biblical model for crime and punishment, there's no jails. There's no prisons in the Old Testament. You are either pay a fine or you are lashed with a whip or you're executed. That's kind of the framework,
Okay,
right?
Okay.
And if you can't pay the fine, what do? You become a servant to the person who you owe.
Okay.
So that's where a lot of the slavery gets created. Not all of it,
That's
but it's
the
a
history
debt
of slavery
right?
was not, ours was a little different.
Versus the, like, you're of this race and you're beneath
Yes,
us.
yeah.
Which was a slavery that was perpetuated or really, anyway.
The history of slavery in the world is not what we experienced in America. We had a tweak on it that was uniquely abhorrent.
No, I don't agree with that.
I do.
It wasn't in America.
War-driven and economic-driven in all the history of the world.
But American
very
slavery
little.
wasn't somehow worse than the slavery at the same time in South America, right? Or in England.
No, I do think it was because in America, the Christian population determined and gave their support to the fact that the reason we're able to do this is because this race is inferior to that race. And that had never been an argument before.
Oh, it absolutely had.
No,
if you look at like the conquistadors going into South America, even Columbus, we're going to Christianize these people and make them our slaves because they're pagans and they're savages and they're beneath us.
Okay, let's not do Columbus because
I'm not against Columbus. I
Yeah.
think he gets a bad rap in a lot of ways.
yeah.
A lot of lies have been said about him that have been perpetuated.
I agree.
But what I'm saying is the mentality of that era was a racial superiority argument.
I don't think it was that. I think it was a cultural superiority. We're more advanced.
Yeah, they're intertwined for sure.
Yeah, but that's not what happened in America. There became a theological that this race was, and combined with evolutionary theory that was developing, this race was not fully human, and these other races are.
Right.
And that had never been an argument, to my knowledge, in any other era of the world.
So here's the wrench, though, is that if you look at the Old Testament model and then how we do crime and punishment today,
Yeah.
I would argue you could say we have slaves in America
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Which is what
So
the
that's
prison
interesting.
system is.
I've never heard that or even thought about it.
Because here's the other side, right? It's unpaid labor. It's majority black men. I mean, it's not unpaid, but it is.
Your point is fines
Our current prison system is a replacement for slavery.
or death. And you're saying biblically, in the Old Covenant, I mean, these
Yeah.
are my words.
Right.
When God did this unique thing for a season of time in the Old Covenant, he made laws for a nation. He had three forms: fines, pain, and death.
Yeah.
What
if you
about,
couldn't pay the
wait a
fines,
minute.
you became a servant.
What about this? Oh, yeah. Okay. That is, your fines goes to servitude.
Yeah.
Yes. And then he had the unique thing that every 7 years and then every 50 years, there were certain Jubilee periods where they
Specifically
had to be
around debt
released.
slavery.
Around that. And,
Yep.
and then that you could sell your inheritance, your land. You actually never really could give it away forever.
Because it was given to you, your
Because-
family by God.
Yeah, because and the unique Old Covenant element in terms of the other nations at the time is God basically is saying, it's all mine.
Right. Yeah.
The other nations, they think it's theirs, but that's not how we're dealing with it. It's mine. Now you get to have it and administer it for me.
So what we've done, and this is another part of America making government into the position of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is what we've done is says, well, we don't have slaves, you and I.
Mm-hmm.
We let the government keep slaves. And so it's just
Wait, you mean by jails and prisons?
by prison system. Yeah. And now it's a for-profit prison system to add on to it in the last several decades.
Well, that's interesting. So this is on second. I'm gonna have to think about that.
And can I add a conspiracy theory to this?
Of course.
So one of the
Wait,
conspiracies...
is it a conspiracy or the confluence of a lot of connections that are strange?
Well, you be the judge. So the conspiracy theory I've heard was that the whole music industry, right? We're going full circle here. The music industry perpetuating and promoting, in particular, rap music, but pop music generally, that would make killing other black men in particular, right? That black men committing murder against each other was an acceptable genre of musical expression that became popularized all over.
Yeah.
Was in line. It happened at the same time in the early 90s, began promoted broadly, the same time that our prison system became privatized. And the companies that were investing in private prisons were also investing in the music industry. And the
Okay.
argument or the conspiracy was, and I've heard some decent people talking about it, that they said, I was in meetings and that's what they said,
Yeah.
was we're going to promote inner city violence to make money off the prisons.
Yeah. Well, it's very unfortunate when you say, try this on for size, and then you say all that. There's something in me that says, I can totally see that happening
Yeah.
in a desperately, I'm going to look for more D's, decrepit age on a decline. I could go for D word after D word of saying how bad it is. Yeah. I can. Yeah. All right. I have to admit, I'm throwing for a little curveball here, a little loop your whole thing with I have not thought about that Old Testament find pain thing. And so
But where did we start on this?
we
started with what was Jesus
town?
was king of our town.
Yeah.
So part of what we were saying and what I was getting to is we take for granted as Christians that like the American way is the good way because patriotism and Christianity have been so intertwined, especially since World War II, right? But in the same time, what we're doing is saying the way that we've been doing it is probably the Christian way, and that's definitely not true.
Okay, so let me ask another
So I want to go
question
back
of
to
you.
the beginning and say, well, let's reevaluate the whole thing from a Christian lens. And what I would say and how I would describe what the founders were doing is they took for granted that we're all going to be Christian and therefore we're going to build a nation this way. I think that's why in a lot of our founding documents, it's not explicit.
Yeah.
Because it's a Christian, what was the quote from de Tocqueville?
Yeah,
was
yeah,
that
yeah.
most Americans live by the tenets of biblical Christianity because they believe them. The rest live by the tenets because they do not want to be thought not to believe them.
I totally think that's right.
And so I think what
Or
I want
accurate.
is to go back and say, no, let's make it explicit. Let's make a Christian nation that says this is why we're doing it. Now, you can't do that by force. You got to do that by... So they say explicitly Christian. We're doing this because the Bible says
are
it.
you saying the documents that our forefathers put, the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights,
Yeah.
which lists our creator. That's as far as it goes.
Yep.
You're saying I would like to edit them to say our creator as revealed in Jesus and the New Testament, so to speak. Something. Right. So up the ante from a theistic to more layered to where it is fully Christian.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. And obviously that won't happen, but the sentiment.
Well, I don't know that it won't happen, but I think it's sort of like saying if Jesus was king of our town, if 2/3 of it could happen if it were a miracle.
Okay, you're right. You're right. If there's an awakening revival, you could get 2/3 of the states to make some changes, etc.
Here's why I think it matters.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you that the chance that it happens is really slim.
Yeah.
I think it matters because what I don't want to go back to is that I negotiated myself to the middle before you even came to the table. Mm-hmm. I think that's what conservatives have been doing. Uh-huh. So what I see Christian nationalism as saying, in fact, we're walking away from the middle of the table. We're over here, and if you want to negotiate, come on over. Mm-hmm. Which is what the left has been, because the left has been dragging the middle farther left in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
In a way that we have been so used to negotiating and finding middle ground and accepting like, well, let's go halfway on everything, that we're going halfway before they even make a first offer. And that's been our mistake.
So I shared last night, and part of the reason you mentioned the documents is because I shared, I asked the question, and we spent some time on the difference between Judaism and Christianity, and Old Testament that is law-oriented, and New Testament that is the power of God in the human heart oriented. Enabling one to fulfill the laws that weren't able to change you before. But we're still nevertheless good, right?
Yep.
And so I had mentioned that I had recently looked through these documents saying, okay, if they're Christian, I want to see it. And it's not there. And so that's what you're responding to. What I didn't say, just because of conversation time and everything, is I also... I read some different articles addressing the topic, and I found one guy who was it was quite a good article, and he says, yes, they don't say it in these documents. However, in the following court cases and ambassador reports to other nations, and he probably had 25 illustrations of this, which were quotes, right?
Yeah.
It was a semi-scholarly article. The Christian religion is referenced explicitly. And so his point was, and which I think is a legitimate point, yes, you're right. It is not the Christian, the documents are not Christian, but they assumed that they were.
Yeah.
They assumed it, and then in the outworking for the next, and the evidence that he put, like the 25 references and quotes and what were for about 100-year span of time, and judges and different disputes. And there was a couple that were interesting with some other nations, and in particular ones with some Arab nations where Muslim or Islam came into play. And so it was just this interesting thing. And so I think he made the case, and I think it was fair that the spirit of our documents were Christian, even though the language of Christian didn't make our documents. And so there's a sense in which both have a truth to them. You probably won't like this, but in a sense, yes, we're a Christian nation, and in a sense, no, we're a theistic nation. There's a sense in which both of those avenues were reflected.
Well, even theistic,
in some way.
Like the Constitution doesn't talk about God.
It does. It says our Creator
in the preamble.
Well, yeah. But that's, there it is.
Something.
Yeah. So to me, and so then I would still argue that, and we've made headway from where what I thought you were saying. I'm not hearing you say that we should be a Christian government and people have to be Christians to be citizens, et cetera, et cetera. I'm hearing you say that the moral framework, which I would then say it's the same thing as a theistic framework. The moral framework, but it does have some components added to it, especially with regards to forgiveness and values that come from the heart, like meekness or gentleness, or even, one of the ones in the Sermon on the Mount is turn the other cheek, which is interesting. We know a person who hit back somebody. And I thought, I should have asked that person when I met him the other day, how do you reconcile I don't know, I'm just asking.
Well,
how do you reconcile that when Jesus said, when somebody strikes you, give them the other cheek? And their story was they kind of struck or threatened, and they struck and threatened back, right? To
deter. My understanding of that is the difference between insult versus self-defense, right? If someone slaps you across the face as an insult to your honor, you don't slap them back.
And I don't really mean to get all into it, but more in the line of It's a difficult one, but this kingdom of Jesus ethics and values are pretty sometimes difficult to understand, and they're not as clean cut as an Old Testament law. They are much more drive it into the heart to what your spirit has in the matter is of great importance.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say is that Christian nationalism, or that we are a Christian nation, what you want to get back to is that the spirit of this kingdom, its values, we want to more explicitly say we want our nation built on those values. We want our laws to reflect those values.
Yeah. And I double checked it, and the Constitution does not mention God or Creator. It's the Declaration does.
The Declaration. Okay.
And the way I think about it is, if I was working in the library,
right.
If I was working in the library and I needed to write a library policy about returning books, I'm not going to say because God so loved the world, we're going to create this, right?
Yes.
It's when you get down to business, you just deal with the business of creating the government and the rules that you need, and that's how I think of the Constitution.
Yeah.
I think in hindsight we look back and say, why didn't they? You know, I saw a great quote about the Second Amendment. And it was like, if you had a time machine, what would you go back and tell the founders to do? And it was the joke was like, I would tell them, including, 20 round magazines and like all these things, right? You got to make a list.
And jets.
Semiotic.
Atomic bombs. Atomic what?
And the thing is that, there were private armies in the time of the Constitution that had every weapon of war in the hands of private citizens.
Let's use this phrase. They had such things called cutting edge weaponry.
Well, I mean, fully well armed ships of war to protect, shipping lanes. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter what you put in there; that it's going to get rewritten and reinterpreted over time by people who have their own agenda.
Never figure out,
and that's how it goes.
If we read it today, some future thing would say, "Why didn't you guys not put phasers and bodily dislocators?"
That's right. Yeah, transportation. Why didn't you have the Star Trek technology into your Second Amendment? Yeah, you just can't see that far.
No.
All right, well, we're past an hour. We're at an hour and 10.
How? I must have had a big miss on the flip there. Okay, anything that we have to cover? I think we probably did everything. What Jesus was king? We did a little bit about the poor people and loyalty. We even did... we did your de Tocqueville quote that we've had there for a while.
You know what I want to get to next time is talk a little bit about that finding truth in the balance between the extremes.
Okay.
And the third way idea.
Yeah.
And where that goes right and where it goes really wrong. We touched on it a little bit when we talked about negotiating with yourself to go to the middle.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be worth spending some time next time.
And I see you have a couple quotes from that D. Pagan article, which I think is a good one to do at some point. There was a lot there. I think it touches on this nationalist stuff. Okay, well, our sand is all at the bottom of the hourglass, I guess. And you've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you've enjoyed the podcast and found something to reconsider, or perhaps something you've never even thought about, do us a favor first. And if you'd click like as you move on, we'd appreciate that. But then the real thing is go find a friend, start a discussion, and remember to think again.
Okay, until next time.